Hello, and welcome to a very different video on Blockland. Now, I made some ridiculous videos on Blockland, and now we're going to go kind of serious, because I am going to show you how to make your very own Blockland weapon. Now, what do I mean by that is, we're going to be able to model, we're going to be able to animate and export our weapons to the appropriate files so where Blockland can actually use them. Now, where I'm going to start is a bit out of order. I always do everything out of order, so forgive me for doing these things out of order. I also am doing this for a friend, so we're starting with animation instead of modeling. We'll cover modeling in the next video, but first we're going to cover animation. Now, what is animation? Well, let's first get our editor open. First things you'll need is obviously Milkshape 3D, if that hasn't occurred to you, that I use Milkshape for practically all my weapon modeling and everything. And we will need, as well as, Notepad++, which, as you can see, I kind of have care about updates. Kind of already have it. It has a modeler, right, or whatnot. That was for Starbound, but whatever. So, firstly, the way I'm going to be starting off is animation. Now, the way you have to animate your weapons is, firstly, we have to get them to the appropriate size. We also need to add the joints, and we also have to have a weapon to animate. Now, for all those who don't know all these things, you'll certainly learn them one way or another, trust me. I kind of learned by assistance with one of my friends, and then also by teaching myself. So it's kind of hard at first, but once you get the idea, we can fully animate and rig weapons to be exactly the way they are. I'm gonna pull up one of my friend's weapons. He wanted me to animate it, but I kind of wanted just to give him a tutorial because it'd be easier for him to learn this way rather than have me do everything for him. And I honestly have a lot of work to do, so thus meaning why there's not many videos on my channel, and also thus meaning that I don't really have too much time to do a lot of these things. So we'll get through this as best as we can. So let me just pull his weapon out. And this can be for any kind of weapon. This is his weapon. It's an AK based firearm. So as you can see, it has a lot of lots of similarities between the AK weapons. And I will go into showing you also as well some different firearms on how we can animate those instead of just an AK weapon, just in case you're animating like an M4A1 or a Scar L, whatnot. So let's first start off by scaling this sucker down. What we need to do first off is select everything and merging the hand resource that we have for Blockland. I will provide a download link for this hand resource I have. Otherwise, you can find it on the internet somewhere. And I do know that there's a song playing in the background that's from Zelda, but it's the only one I have right now that's pleasant to listen to while I'm talking over this. So now we have the hand resource here with the firearm selected. We're going to need to use the scale tool, and since this weapon is, well, firstly, it's not even snapped to grid, which amazes me because this thing is very, very detailed, and I really, really, really like the weapon itself. And I really like how he made it. So, first, we're going to scale down by 0.8 on all of the axes. The reason why I'm saying 0.8 is because it is kind of large, but not as vastly large as my models. I'll show you how those look like after we're done scaling down and getting this thing ready for animation mode. So we'll go ahead and scale it down roughly to where it's the same size, or just as good enough of a size for the hands. Also make noteworthy that your weapons may be huge at first, but don't let that deceive you, because you can always scale them down to the correct size with the hand resource. Because this is the actual size of the Blockland hands. So for example, if I put a guy right here, this is how big the weapon's going to be after I'm done exporting. But we kind of don't want it this big. It's a little large. So now that it's kind of there, I'm going to scale down a little bit more by only 0.9 now. And it's okay to have your gun a little bit thinner than typical. Guns are not really thick, they're not too thick sometimes, so it's roughly about the right size. You always want to center your weapon, especially when you're doing iron sights. We'll cover that later on. So the way you center them is you gotta carefully do this off the grid. As much as I don't like working off the grid. But that doesn't matter. For this part at least. Because we're not putting together a weapon. Now that it's scaled down, let's align the hands. So we will take the hands and put them in the appropriate places. If you're familiar with Milkshape, you can already see that I'm fully aware of most of the XYZ axis locks and how to work with the program itself. So it'll take some time to get used to putting together weapons this way, especially when you're first starting your modeling. But I will discuss more on the functions of this program in the next video about modeling. So now that we have our hands in place, we are going to, I believe, put the joints on. Yeah. So the way joints works is, these are the items we use for animating a weapon. For example, if I want a certain point to move, I will scroll in here. For example, this bolt right here, I'll show you the textured version. I would place a joint about roughly, let's see if those are not hidden, okay, here. Now that's just if I wanted the bolt to move. But if I move it in this state, it will not move the bolt. That's because it's not in animation mode. We'll get there in a second. So, there are 3 points that are very important. One of them being optional, but they're important depending on your weapon. So, let me just go back to wireframe because it's easier for me to put this thing in the right place for the muzzle. Okay. I center all my things. You can do that as well, but that's just an OCD thing, not me. So now, the 3 points we need are the mount point. Typically where you have the gun mount up to the player, for example. So that position right here will mount on the right hand when in Blockland. The next one we need, and keep this selected by the way, it's fairly important, the muzzle point, or where the projectiles are fired from. Because what's a gun without bullets, right? That's the way I say it. Now, every time we make a joint, we're going to select this, except for some exceptions. I'll show you in a moment. Now, the eject point which is kind of obviously placed right here, is where the casings come out of. Casings act like objects flying out of a gun, basically. They're their own entity in themselves. Not really a projectile, it's just more objects flying out of the gun, as obvious. So now that we placed our 3 main important points, we are going to need some other points that are just parts of the gun moving. The way I do this is I select the mount point always, and I place the next joint where I want a certain object to move. Right there, that will be the bolt mechanism. Every time it fires, it will bounce back, ejecting the empty casings. We'll select this again and go to the magazine. Now this magazine will be movable after I assign the vertexes to the points. And now I want the hand. Reason being is I'm animating with hands. So if you're not really much of a hands person, I don't think this video or this weapon is going to be for you. Sorry. Now that that's covered, you probably were wondering what the heck this magazine's doing out here. Now, typically, I'd keep everything right here, for example, as is, if I wasn't working with an extra magazine. So basically, if this is all I have, this is all I'm working with. But since I have another magazine, we are going to use this one to have a secondary reload, where the magazine will be used to dislodge the other magazine to replace it. See if I can get this centered. Centering things is kind of important to me. Keeps things in balance, I guess. Okay. So now we have our joints, we have to name our joints. Though I'm going to move this to a much more appropriate spot so that it can be hidden when put into game. Program's jumpy. So, for example, if I want it to be on the player, I could put it like just about here. Ideally, just for a point being used. I don't know. Yeah, okay. I was making sure if it was correctly. Facing the correct way. So let me get this aligned kind of in first person mode. Okay, so let's move on to naming the joints. Our first joint should be mount point. Now, typically the way you name it, yes, there is a specific way you name mount point. You first put mount as lowercase, and then point starts uppercase. It's a technical thing. It's the only way the game registers it. Same goes for muzzle point. And lastly, if you're using it, eject point. Why do I say if you're using eject point? I did say it's important, but it's important to the specific firearm you're using. For example, if you're using a caseless weapon or a laser rifle, for example, I don't think your casings are going to be ejected unless you're ejecting the cells individually after each fire. Now, with the other things, the names really don't matter too much. So, for example, just for a memory thing, I will name the bolt, obviously, bolt. And since I have 2 magazines, I will name this one clip 1. Now, if you're going to argue me what's the difference between a clip and magazine, I don't really care right now, honestly. That argument is, 1, stupid in its nature, and 2, pointless to make against firearms. If you're really that into firearms, I guess you can go ahead and rant on, but I'm not really going to listen to that. Then we named the hand lowercase l hand, in hopes to one day actually use the in-game's hand to actually animate, instead of having to use these hands to animate. So, for example, I would like to see a weapon that will move the hands, but keep the default values, for example, like hooks and such. But, it's just a thing that I do. Now, this will be named Clip 2, just for reference. Now to assign the points. Now, the way the joints are assigned is via vertexes. So, for example, if I select vertex, this is a vertex. Though they do assign via group, but they just take the vertex of the specific group that you're assigning them to. For example, I have all this selected. I'm going to assign, and if I go to joint, select this joint in animation mode, I should be able to move all those without having to select the groups individually. For example, I can move the magazine without having to select all of the groups. It's assigned to that specific joint that the vertex will move. So I can rotate it, I can move it. I cannot scale these things though. That's one thing you can't do in animation mode. Since our magazine's now selected, we will assign the left hand. And you can tell what's going to be assigned. The left hand. Now, since this is my friend's model, this is where things get complicated because it's not made exactly the way I would make it. I'd have the magazine just a little bit out, so I can easily assign it, but since this is his weapon, you know, complications. This is only going to get harder by the second, though. And this guy, oh no. He got me. Is this it? No, that's not it. Of course, this is where things get difficult, so I will be back once I get this darn thing selected. See if they match. Ah, yeah. That's how I selected it. Okay. So now that we have our magazine selected, we can assign to this joint. Remember to always test your joints when assigning so that you have the right vertexes selected, so that they all move accordingly and you don't mess the weapon up. Here's where things get interesting. You see this mess? I gotta select individually how that bolt is actually made. Though, I'm gonna make one minor edit. Because these faces don't need to be here. In fact, these vertexes I'm going to get rid of because I don't need them necessarily. all I need is this guy. And it would make the same general shape. Now, if you get mad at me, I'm sorry I modified your weapon, but that's as far as modifying I go. I'm typically nice when it comes to weapons that aren't mine. When I mean typically, I mean I'm very respectful to weapons that aren't mine. Okay. It looks like he did the same thing up here, so let me just clean up these faces here. You don't want too many faces on your weapon. Okay. Looks like that's the bolt there. Oh, he did it again here. Just that it's on the inside. Now, this weapon is very detailed. Let me go ahead and say that. You don't typically go as far as doing all this to get so much detail into a gun for Blockland. But this is his weapon, and I'm just showing him how to animate. I'm not really wanting to judge his modeling, because it's fantastic on how he does it. But there's just some things that I like to point out here and there to anyone who actually is going into modeling. Okay, so let me unhide all this and let me check if I have everything selected accordingly. Looks right. Bolt can fly back. Looks correct. Little bits of it looks kind of odd. Mainly because he doesn't have shadows in place. Now typically, I'll show you an example of why I said he doesn't have shadows in place in a second here. So I'm going to sign this. And then I'm going to select, now okay, I should have explained this right away before I jump to conclusions. After you assign all the joints that are moving with their own thing, you're going to select unassigned, meaning everything that was not assigned to these specific joints, and assign them accordingly. Now the gun will move with all these joints that are connected to it, besides this guy. This guy is special because we want to use him as a secondary reload action when we get to the animation. So before I even go to talk about the shadowing and the other things that I'm going to be critiquing about weapon modeling, I'm going to test my joints to see if they actually are animated the way I want them to be. So yeah, this all moves correctly. No changes need to be needed here. Let's see. Magazine. I tested it beforehand. Left hand, make sure there's nothing attached to it. Yeah, it looks like it's alright. Next part is seeing if this gun moves on its own. With everything. Yep. Okay, so now what I'm going to talk about, shadowing. Now, you know how I said that he doesn't have particular shadows in this bolt area, which kind of made it awkward? Well, let me go ahead and show you kind of how I put shadowing in these situations. So, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and go to box. I'm tying this kind of into modeling, I don't care. Right here, typically, is never really exposed. So, for example, I would put about yay big. I'm not keeping this, by the way, if you're worried. Okay, so now this thing's really thick. I put scale down. towards desired size. Okay, for example, I would put a shadow like right here. This all can be undone, so select aside so that every time it bounces back, for example, it would have just the effect that it's shooting out shells from right here. And you don't really need to put so much detail into the eject point. So what I'm showing you is you don't have to go way bonkers into making a weapon look very accurate. And you can just simplify it and it'll still look alright. Because this is on the level of very highly detailed versus how people would want you to actually make weapons into Blockland. Okay, so now that we covered the practically all of what we needed to cover for assigning the joints, making sure that they're named correctly, we're moving on to animation. Animation works like a GIF. So for example, all these down here, this is your keyframe selector. What keyframe means, it's a specific frame where this is at before the movement. For example, I'm going to set keyframe 1 as such. Now, if I want to start moving this thing, for example, if I want to just like move it upward, I'd take the model, the mount point, and move it up like this. But the thing is, I'm still on the first keyframe. So every time I go back, it's going to go like this. Now, the typical way you want to make something move is you'll go a couple frames or a few frames forward, depending on how long you want to make the animation. Make that adjusted movement and set the keyframe via Control K, or you're going to simply animate and set the keyframe. Now what I've made is a small animation where the gun will jump up over your shoulder, because this is how you realistically hold a firearm. Now, with that being said, we're going to be working with a certain amount of keyframes. There is no limit to how many keyframes you can have. You can have as many keyframes as you can ever desire. You can have 200, 2,000, 2,000,000 if you're so intently on making an animated weapon so precise with its animations. But for the sake of our video, we're going to go ahead and set the max frames to 175. Mainly because we're going to be working with a lot of the animations wise of putting it together. And also we're going to be sectioning off where the animations are used. So, for example, the first keyframe is never used for animations. Yes, I said it. This keyframe is never used. Instead, the second one is going to be our use animation. So, for example, let's start off by putting the gun to the side, like we are going to carry it over from our chest. It's not the right tool. Love making mistakes. Okay, so now that we got our first keyframe that we're using, not this one, mind you, keyframe number 2. You can tell from right here that is our current frame. So let's say I want to bring up the gun casually and pull the bolt on it with the left hand. So the way you would have to do this is, first off, we're going to start slowly. Mind you, remember to make sure snap to grid is off, or otherwise your animation is going to be very, very jumpy. And also keep movement minimal. Do not overexceed your movement unless you are making a large, exaggerated physical action. For example, like slamming in a mag, and the gun takes the counterweight into effect going upward. But if we're just moving the gun around and not slamming it around or anything, we're gonna keep movement minimal. So I went ahead 3 frames, if you heard there. And if you saw. So I'm gonna bring this guy up slowly and adjust accordingly the way I want this. Now, I'm not making this weapon into Blockland, mind you. I'm just showing this weapon via tutorial. I may put it into Blockland, and I may show you how an end product would look, but I'm not promising that this weapon's going to Blockland, simply because I'd like my friend to animate it and make it himself, because I don't know, I just don't feel like it's right for me to take somebody else's model and animate it accordingly. So now that we got our movement here, it should adjust accordingly going up when we play the keyframes. I'll show you right after we're done making the use animation. That's what we're on, by the way. So now we got this one. We will go forward 3 more keyframes. And this is actually zoomed out pretty far. I didn't notice that. Bring it up. Keep movement minimal. Remember that. Okay. So we're just going to keep going until we can get back to the place where we had our weapon. Okay. Add 3 more keyframes. Now we're adjusting the gun to where it will be hitting our shoulder. Though in Blocko terms, this would be underneath the shoulder, probably. And now I'm going to come back to the original state. This is why we never use the first state for animations. We use it as a placeholder to where the gun was positioned correctly. So now we will paste the keyframe. Go down like this as it's coming down on our shoulder. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm not finishing the animation here. I'm going to bring up slightly this part. Take the hand. And we're going to rack the bolts. Yes, it's possible to rack an AK's bolt with your left hand. Now, remember, movement needs to be minimal so we can make this look as clean and as realistic as possible. And again, we're talking about a video game, so realism is not exactly what we can go for all the time. Even if that's our desire, our animations typically are realistic or pretty close to how we would want it in real life. And again, I'm going to be covering most of the things you'll be needing to do for putting weapons into Blockland. Why did I rotate that way? Okay. Now what I'm going to do is so I can get the left hand on the bolt correctly is I'm going to take the first keyframe again. This is used very often for just adjusting or repositioning the weapon back to its current state, or adjusting positions for the hands, which I will be currently doing right now. So we're going to be moving this towards the bolt. And sorry if my voice sounds off or sounds like it's not really interested. It's currently 8 in the morning and I got up at 5:30 or so, or whatever, to do homework. The glorious fun of homework, especially in college. Okay. It's clipping the gun. Typically, I don't like it when it clips the gun. But sometimes, you just can't get past that. For example, like the G36, sometimes your hand will collide with the rail. And that, I think is alright. But there's just some times where it just doesn't look correct. Okay, so we pull up, and we're going to reach for the bolt there. Oh, the positioning's kind of weird on this one. The handguard, the upper receiver area is pretty far from the bolt, so that's what you get when you're using an AK. There's nothing wrong with the AK model if it sounds like I don't like it. It's a good weapon. I prefer animating an AR because it's much easier. Yeah, I know. I prefer easier than awkwardness. Okay, I moved that. Yeah, that looks alright. Yeah, I guess we can use our point that we copied. Now, the trick to this is operating on selected joints only. I should have covered that. So, for example, if we're taking only the left hand to animate, we're going to take it, move it to, I don't know, whatever position. For example, like pulling the bolt or whatnot, like I just did there. Should explain this. Now I have to take the time just to do it again. We'll go to animate, operate on selected joints only, so that only selected joints can be affected by this. So, like, setting the keyframe on it and everything. We want this off when we were setting a new keyframe, so just mind that. And we will go to copy keyframes, which will only copy where the position of the hand is, because it's the only selected item. I already did that, so we'll go ahead and just position it. Oh. And I kind of want to move this closer because I am a animation snob. I know this because I judge animations even in Gary's mod, which is ridiculous. I have a problem. But this is where the life of the weapon comes in, so it's important to have good animations. 1, 2, 3. And that's our pasted one. Okay, so now we are going to pull back the bolt. So now I got that selected. Important thing is rely on this window a lot. The 3D view window is your friend. These windows are helpful as well, but they don't have the textured mode. You can turn that on too, but they're not as reliable as a 3D view so that you know what you're doing. Now I'm debating on what if I should have it pulled back like so-and-so, the hand movement, or so-and-so. With animations, you can go one way or another, and it's very dependent on how you look at it, or how you want a particular animation. For example, this may be not the way my friend wants this to be animated. He'll animate it to accordingly how he wants it. I'll try to keep it close to how he told me beforehand. Okay, so we pull it up, go to grab the bolt. Now I'm gonna make a small little pause before the pull. Just to add a little bit more drama to it. Then we'll add 3 more keyframes for the bolt pull. Rack the thing back. That hand probably should be a little bit lower. Because we're using our left hand. Just realized that. If we go back to its original state, I probably should have selected only the hand so that we can copy the bolt racking forward. You would typically use your right hand, but then again, there is different ways to reload, so this is kind of how he wanted me to animate it. I might go back one more frame, but we're not going to go full 3 frames. This guy a little bit. This just gives it drama, like I said. We'll go forward 3 frames to where we're racked backwards. And we will adjust the hand a little bit more. Move the guy forward. And move the hand backwards accordingly. Well, back to its original place accordingly. Slowly but surely. That's the magazine. More mistakes like that, Nick, and you're going back to the drawing board. Right. Okay, I'm gonna rotate back. Let me check the hand. Yeah, that's looking like it's going back. Okay, go back, take this state, copy it. It's kind of how it's going to look in the end. 3. And I'm going to bring it up 2 because this is going to be kind of a lightweight weapon. I say kind of lightweight because averagely this AK-74 is roughly 8 to 10 pounds, maybe more, depending on the alloy you use, of course, or metal, whatever. Okay, so now that we got our animations done, we can check them. So what that said is the animation plays up to 56 frames, or 59 frames, excuse me. So we'll start from 2 and play up to 59 so we can see our use animation, and this will play every time you draw your weapon. Now let me just try to play that a little bit slower for you. So you bring it up and rack the bolt. Could use a little bit of adjustment to the movement back, racking it and making it look more dramatic. Again, and we're playing it at a very slow speed. Plus, this is not how it's going to finalize in the game. So let's show our joints again, and I'll show you how to correct what I've done. So we'll go back to that little area where I said it could use a little bit more of a pull. Okay, so we're gonna rotate and we're gonna bring it back a little bit more, just to add some drama. Because this will define the movement going forward and backwards. And the hand should move a little bit further downward. Forward. Yeah, there we go. That looks better. Now in the animator, let's take a look to see if our progress was better. Yeah, now that is a bolt rack there. You pull it back with force. It goes back. So these are the frames for our use animation. Now, the rest of the animations that we're going to cover are fire, clip out, clip in, clip out, empty, and clipped in, empty. These are named accordingly later on as we go out to animate more. So let's start by making our firing animation. So let's go back to frame 59. And since we're using a cased, well, a weapon that uses casings, the way firing operates in the game is it just automatically kind of fires. The script we're going to be using, though, doesn't differ how fast it fires. It will play at its certain rate as it is animated. Excuse me, I'm getting my tongue mixed up here. So, it will use how many frames that we put into the game, we'll put into the gun, and it'll play that fast in the game. So typically a fire animation, we will use only 2 frames to start off first. We are not going to make this instantaneous. Okay, so since we're working with an AK, it has a little kick upwards, so we will... Why do I have a feeling that that thing is actually attached to the bolt itself? Be right back. I will adjust this. So I'm not sure if this is how my friend intends it to be. Then again, I'm just making a tutorial, so this is kind of how the bolt operates anyways. He made it as accurate as he can to an AK. So the way we're going to do this is 2 frames. Again, there's only 1 space between the starting frame. Also, reminder, when you finish your use animation, make a frame afterwards so that you can have a space between your animations so we can define what those are. Okay, so now move ahead 2 keyframes so you have 1 space between them. And it's important because the kick should be as close to as a real kick in real life, I guess. Even though I don't think I've ever shot an AK before. But it's fairly close to how this is. I've seen it in video games, so... We kind of roughly like to replicate some video games. We take inspiration also from video games on how those weapons are animated. So I'm going to bring this back a little bit more, just to give it that nice, powerful slam to the back of your shoulder there. Move head 2 keyframes. Bring the bolt back slightly, but not all the way. This will be the jumping up phase for an AK. As it's returned back to its original position. This may be a little bit of an oomph, but bear with me. It looks better in-game rather than in an editor. Okay, so that was 60 to 67. Messed that up. And I'm hoping you guys can see the visual effects my mouse is giving off, and also see my mouse moving around and showing you where and what is. Where is what and what is. Yeah, definitely. That's the correct terminology for that. Yeah, this looks pretty good. Yeah, the bolt will slam back and all that stuff. It looks nice. Doesn't look like it's doesn't look like it inhibits the shoulder too much. But it still looks like it has that force and pounding effect that an AK would have using a 7.62 round. Okay, so now that we're done with the firing animation, let's move on to the reloads. Clip out is our first one. So that's 67. 68, we're starting here. Remember, set keyframes between each other. It's fairly important, because sometimes the keyframes will mix in, and you'll get unwanted results. Okay, so, let me think for a second. Now, we're just gonna do a casual pull-out magazine and pull-in reload. the way we're going to do this is we're just going to take this and kind of put it in the general area where the second magazine is. And we're going to bring it back up and put it back in. We're not switching the magazines because... well, we could try to... well, just for the sake of video, I want to make this kind of simplistic. What we could do is, for example, we could take the left hand, bring it back down to this magazine. For example, grab it, bring it back up, oh, lovely. Take the bottom-ish area of this mag, pull it out, place the new one in, and then pull that one back. But for the sake of the video, I'm just going to be covering about the sections of where the reloads start and finish. I'm not going into super detail about how to animate here. I mean, you'll learn tricks and tips on how to do these things. So, 68. I'm going to go ahead and go forward 1, 2, and 3 keyframes. You want to take at least 3 keyframes to go around. I'm just going to adjust this guy forward a bit just to get the movement started. It's a patience thing. If you don't have patience, you probably shouldn't be doing this. We'll go to 3. Again, I'm keeping these in 3s so that I can keep the animations separate. That looks good so far. This is an easy way to test it, is you grab the little keyframe tool and start sliding it accordingly. Okay, so let's put this guy down here to where he's grabbing the magazine. Select both the magazine and that, and copy them. The reason being is because I'm going to have the position saved so I can easily put that back together. May bring the guy down so that I can... yeah, I'm going to bring it a little bit back down. That looks pretty good. It'll look better in game, like I said. Okay, rotate him a little bit like this. Down, bring the gun down a little bit. Okay, so we're working on clip out, by the way. That's how the order of these things go. And we're going to make a mag pull. down about here. We're going to copy that too, so we got the position. I'm going to use only 2 keyframes for this part. Don't make this movement too much. The only too much area you're going to make it is for the magazine. So now I got the mag out. Just a little bit more this way, just for the movement. And we are going to force the gun a little bit downward now, because we got the, doesn't bounce upward as much. There we go. Paste our magazine, and then we'll adjust the gun as it takes the force from pulling the magazine out. And we will still continue that movement where it's rebalancing. So now it should look like you pulled something out. Again, be gentle. Don't throw the gun around. You're gonna get some crazy animations by doing that. Unless that is your goal, to make a gun that's flying across the screen. I won't judge you. But typically we want to keep the weapon in the easier and most desired place on the screen the whole time. Okay. We're almost done with clip out here. Where I'm going to get it to is I'm going to position this magazine fairly close with this one. But I want to make it as off screen as I can. I'm going to bring this guy back down a little bit. Just for movement. Okay, now we got clip out. And this looks fantastic. In fact, I'm really happy with this animation. Yeah, just the simplest animation here is perfect. Okay, so instead of adding another frame right next to where that ends, we're just going to keep on continuing. Reason being is because we want these animations to sync up with each other. We don't want them to be off or anything. So clip out will be I'm just going to adjust this, but clip out will be 68 through 103 frames. And then clip in will start right after, but we're going to start clip in at keyframe 106. Reason being is because we want to synchronize our reload animation. Sorry if I repeat some things, it's because I just want to get my thoughts out, and I want to make sure I'm doing this all correctly for you guys, so that you guys don't get too confused as to how to do this. And the parts where I'm silent, I'm mainly making it self-evident that I'm going by keyframes of 3 and not moving the firearm way too much than it needs to. So I'm gonna kind of angle it a little bit more this way. That doesn't look right. That doesn't look right. It needs to go down. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, this is a fine example of jumpy animations. You see how it jumps up like this? Not that this is a bad animation or a bad way to start. It just doesn't look like it flows in together correctly. So, for example, the way I started this one was perfectly. Just adjusting firmly, slightly aggressively, and not going all over the place. This next section, though, was an impatient jump. So between here and there. This guy, I don't want up anymore. So, be cautious on where you place your weapon, so that it doesn't do a giant jump. So now this looks a little bit smoother. It doesn't, like, bounce upwards. Okay, so adjusted 3 more keyframes again. Okay. Yeah, sometimes it's a bit sensitive, so be careful when you're rotating. Okay, real fast. I'm going to go back to this state and copy where the hands are. I'm not going to paste them just yet. This jump would be too much. Excuse me. Okay. This is where I think it's kind of appropriate, but I'm gonna add 1 extra to that 3. So I'm going 4 keyframes here. Make sure I got that selected. And again, I'm going very cautiously. I'm not throwing the weapon around too much, so that we get fluent animations. Yeah, I think I may put this gun in game after all. I'm really liking how this is going. We're gonna do 2 keyframes here to add the momentum of the build-up for the magazine being put in. And adjust accordingly. Do not exaggerate unless it's needed. We don't want weapons to be flying all over the place, unless that is your goal. I think yeah, I messed that one up. I need to be 2 frames and not 3. Because this is putting in the mag. We're not going to, just yet, add the jump. We're going to add it right here. We're going to add 3 keyframes. Move the hand up a bit, just to get the drama in. Okay. See how that works. We want just enough, but you don't want to go over the top. So it looks like it's being forced. And we're gonna go a little bit further. Move it forward like so. Add 3 more keyframes. And then we're gonna reposition the hand back slowly but surely. So with a good amount of practice, it takes about an hour to model, an hour to animate, and maybe even slightly 30 to 20 minutes to script this weapon to get it functioning in game. That's to give you an idea on how fast you can become at modeling these things. So, if I were focused and not making a video to showcase this, I think I would be done a while ago. Okay. Move the hand a little bit more. And bring the gun down and rotate to where it's more square, where it was off beforehand. Okay, I'm gonna go back now. Let's see. Should be going forward a little bit more. Gets a tiny bit more movement when coming back down. Until we get back into the hand. Gonna go 2 frames and bring it back up to its position. Now that we have both the primary and secondary, well, we both have the clip out and clip in animations. Let's check if our animations are fluid, are very, oh, I can't even word it. We'll check if our animations synchronize fairly well, which they should. So from 68, 143. And it looks pretty good. Got the movement down. The gun stays in practically the same spot most of the time with fair, small, minimal movement. So again, take your time. It takes patience to make these animations. Now, I'm going to stop this video here and we'll continue on part 2 of animating the weapon. So I'm going to start recording right after this. I'm just showing how your animations should be synchronized. And they should look like they come together in one piece. So thank you for watching and tune in to the next video. It should be right after this one, where we will finally do clip out empty and clip in empty. Thanks for watching.